Hello, everyone out there. It, of course, is 8 p.m. Sunday night, our usual time for the Drew Tube Show. And I've got a really, really special guest, a really good friend. I say that a lot, but this is truly the case here with Pat Boland. And we talk a lot on Messenger about mainly our favorite shared case together, which is, of course, the DB Cooper heist. And Pat had pointed out earlier, hey, does everybody that tunes into your show really do they know the case? And I would say probably 90% do, but somebody may come along that doesn't know the case. But I would encourage you to go read about it. This is, of course, the Norjack hijacking that happened on Thanksgiving Eve of 1971, where a man walked into Portland International Airport, bought a $20 ticket for cash. He identified himself as Dan Cooper, later becomes known as DB due to a media screw up. The plane gets in the air. He turns in his note for ransom. He wants $200,000 cash and 4 parachutes, which was really smart because it would have looked like he was going to take a hostage with him. Plane circles around while they're meeting his demands. Eventually lands in Seattle. The ransom is brought to him, the 200,000 in cash, the 2 front, 2 back parachutes he requested, and not soon, somewhere after the plane takes off from Seattle and somewhere over the Pacific Northwest, he jumps out of the plane and he's never found again. So that's the DB Cooper case in a nutshell. And then sometime February 1980, a young boy named Brian Ingram, 8 years old, finds roughly $5,800 of DB Cooper's money on a place called the Tinsley Bar, which is on the banks of the Columbia River. So that's the case in a nutshell. And without further ado, this is, of course, Pat Boland. Pat is a former marketing consultant. She is an armchair detective, like I am, and so many others. And according to the Cooper Vortex, which is the my source for everything, that really got me started in this case. Of course, Darren Schafer's great show. Pat is a fan of Tina, Flo, and Alice, and those, of course, are the flight attendants. Back then, they were called stewardesses or stews for short. But those are her heroes, and I wanted to ask you a little more about that. Is that one of the things that brought you into the case? Was the flight attendant's interaction with DB Cooper?
Probably not. I mean, I was a little kid in 1971, so I'd like to say that I was fascinated with it the minute I heard about it, but of course that's not true. No, I don't know. I like mysteries. I'm a big mystery reader. I grew up with Nancy Drew, and now I just pretty much exclusively read mystery books. Those are my favorites. So I really didn't come into knowing about those three ladies until I didn't realize you were going to see comments until
Oh, that's Tim.
I
That's I
started.
put that up because that's our good friend
Oh, okay.
Tim
Oh, okay.
Wallace.
Until I really started getting into the case, I didn't know anything about those ladies. But when I started reading, they were all so young. They were in their early 20s, barely out of high school. They were faced with a absolutely frightening, horrible situation that they were going to be killed, and they saved the day. They kept Cooper calm. They kept none of the passengers ever knew they were being hijacked, which is like unbelievable. And they acted with such grace, I felt like, and have continued to act that way. They haven't, tried to make money off of it, or they've been, pretty low key. And now Tina Mucklow, one of the flight attendants, there's going to be a movie about her life, which should be interesting. So I just think they're really cool ladies. I like them. I don't think Cooper's a hero. That's for sure. He's a criminal as far as I'm
He's just
concerned.
he's a sleazebag, like they thought for sure.
He totally is. He totally is.
But yeah, and in listening to again to your Vortex episode with Darren, which I did again today, and I highly recommend that to everybody. You like the Mad Men style and just the error in the clothes is one of the things that kind of brought you into the case, and they certainly had that. The stewardesses back then had some class
Well,
about them.
I have teased with some people that I'm going to start a group, and it's only for people who remember 1971, because I remember the first time when I first got on the big Facebook group, the DB Cooper mystery group. And one of the first things I ever saw was a man, I don't remember who it was, saying, "Why was Cooper wearing a suit on the plane?" And I was so surprised. I thought because it was 1971 and everybody wore suits. I mean, so I think knowing about that era we're talking about most men of the age that we think Cooper was were veterans. Growing up probably in the Depression, or at least having parents who were really Depression era. I mean, it's a whole different vibe about what people acted like. We were in the middle of the Vietnam War. I mean, think about it. We were ready to hop into Watergate. We were having the women's liberation movement. We had the civil rights movement. I mean, this was such a tumultuous time in our history. And I think unless you were there, you've read about it, but it was different to experience that on all the hijackings. I mean, I remember as a kid, every night on the news, we'd watch Walter Cronkite, every night a plane was being hijacked, typically to Cuba, that it became like a running joke on, Johnny Carson or whatever. So I think it does help to understand the time period and really what was going on. And that Cooper, in the context of all this, to me makes him that much more interesting, just because he was an older guy. And typically back then, when you were in your 40s, I mean, you were like an old man. I mean, now everybody's Tom Cruise, he's like 60 something.
Defies age.
Really like, he's jumping out of airplanes and doing all these
Top
crazy
Gun.
stunts and everything. But back then, I mean, 60 was not the new 40. And I mean, no way. You were 45. You were like somebody's husband, somebody's dad. You were like just some older guy. And what he did was so outrageous for his age group that
you didn't see those guys at drop zones. They were all 20s, early 20s, jumping out of planes, which was still a pretty young sport in the early 70s. So that was audacious.
I mean, and a lot of guys did jump when they were in the wartime, but when they came home, they didn't continue jumping. Like, this wasn't a sport. This was part of their service to our country. So they don't want to come home. And it's like a lot of guys, like we were watching an old movie today and they were talking about, this was 1950s movie, how they had been pilots in the war. Excuse me, but there was no way that they came home and continued to fly planes. I mean, that was a part of their lives that was over and done with, and probably didn't even want to ever think about it again. So the fact that this guy even thought about jumping out of a plane is just so outrageous.
And I remember you saying on Darren's show that the first time that you became aware of it is you do remember sort of when it happened. You probably watched Walter Cronkite break the story. And back then, when you heard about the crime, would you even fathom today that this case would still be unsolved so many years later?
No, I cannot fathom any of this. Excuse me. No, to me, it's not even so weird that they never caught Cooper. What's weird to me is that they've never even identified him. I mean, that's what's so wacky. I mean, how could you not know who this guy is? I don't understand that at all. No, I don't. And honestly, if I had to put my hand on a stack of Bibles, I would say that I don't think we're any closer now to solving this case than we were 53 years ago. I really don't.
That's amazing because you're.
I mean, what do we have?
Yeah, what do we have after all these years? And of course, this will bring us around to what we were talking about before the show started. Of course, is the infamous tie that DB Cooper wore on the plane. And of course, the exotic metals that Tom Kay and a group called the Citizen Sleuths had found with the titanium on there that was fairly rare, I guess, in 1971, possibly antimony, which is pretty uncommon too. And those two mixed together, and some rare earth metals, and some of they call dirty manufacturing. I'm not sure the exact term, but that seems to be the since the cigarettes were destroyed, as we know. So there's no hope for DNA there, unfortunately. But we have this tie. And you and I were talking about before the show is, did he leave this tie on purpose, or where do you think the tie came from? Or do you think the tie will eventually lead to Cooper's identity? I know it's brought forward a couple of new suspects over the past couple of years. Where do you think it's going with the tie?
Well, the tie is extremely important for the fact that this is the only thing we have that existed before the hijacking. I mean, there is other evidence. There are the parachutes he touched. There's a boarding pass. There's the money that we found. They found at Tinsley Bar. Clearly that, but that all existed post hijacking. So we know, I mean, people who say, well, it was some other guy left the tie on the plane, it can be completely discounted. It was found in the seat he was sitting in. So he was not sitting on that tie. That doesn't even make sense. And there were like 4 witnesses who did say he was wearing a thin black tie. So we're just going to make the assumption, yes, he was wearing that tie, of course, that day. The problem is we don't know how long he owned that tie. Did he purchase it back in 64, 65-ish when they were manufactured? Because they had stopped selling those ties. Because if you remember and watch a lot of old TV shows, skinny ties were no longer in style by 71. I mean, they were wearing very wide ties. And I was watching a movie the other night from that era, and I noticed nobody was wearing a tie clip either. Those seem to not be as common, because when you think about it, a really wide tie, you need a little short tie clip doesn't really look right. The shorter tie clips were made for the thinner ties. So where this tie came from, we have no way of knowing if this was originally his tie and he wore it every day to work, and that's where all that stuff came from, or he picked it up at work, he picked it up from his brother-in-law, it was at a thrift store. And I know people don't like to hear about the words thrift store. They're like kind of bad words. But I was even reading, I mean, even the FBI, one of the special agents, like in 2010-ish, gave an interview to ABC or someone and said, we're not really looking at the tie that closely anymore because he could have bought it at a thrift shop. I mean, literally, the FBI.
They even considered it.
Of course. And they were really discounting because there was DNA on the tie. I mean, not in 1970. Well, there was DNA in 1971. We just didn't know what DNA was in terms of solving cases. When they finally, the science kind of caught up with the tie in the early 2000s, and they did do some DNA testing. I mean, there were 3 samples that they took, one being a primary contributor and then 2 lesser contributors. All they could really say at the time that they were male DNA, and they were only partial samples, and that they could not be used to find a suspect, but they could be used to rule someone out. So then they kind of, as they say in Casablanca, they rounded up the usual suspects. And so some of the people they had looked at quite extensively, about 5 or 6 guys who'd been on the radar forever, they did get some DNA samples from them, and they said they didn't match. But then, of course, fast forward, the FBI then was saying, well, we really don't know whose DNA that was. I mean, that was 30 years after that tie was all over the place. I mean,
all over, it had shipped back to certain stores, and FBI parties. It's rumored people would wear it and barehand it. And
I mean, J. Edgar Hoover asked for the tie at some point. I mean, it just was kind of everywhere. So I guess them saying that they could only rule people out, but based on today's technology, which is unbelievable what they're doing with DNA, because I follow a lot of these DNA pages, and every single day they are solving a case or they're identifying a John Doe. It's unreal. So what I want to know is, does the FBI actually have the physical scrapings or whatever they took off of the tie, or do they just have like the profile written out? I mean, I don't know. I don't know what they have. But to me, could they go back and look at that now with what is going on and retest it and do forensic genetic genealogy, which we've all been reading about, because the most famous case being the Golden State Killer.
Correct. Joe D'Angelo.
Who really thought he was off the hook. And, they were able to pin it on him. So again, I think the FBI, people who say they didn't put a good, they didn't do a good job, they don't know what they're talking about. I mean, if you even read 5302s and how many tens of thousands are there, I mean, they put in the full court press on this. I mean, they really wanted to get this guy. But today in 2024, it's not important. And really, should it be? I mean, they have other things to do.
Yeah.
I would hate to think that our tax dollars, thousands and thousands of dollars are being used to test some old DNA sample for a guy who's clearly dead anyway. And it doesn't really matter. I mean, there's no closure or justice for any victims, because thankfully there weren't any.
Yeah,
but, I mean,
and he's most likely deceased. Whoever people believe Cooper was, most likely, if he was a middle-aged smoker in 1971, he's probably not around.
Yeah, I mean, so he's gone. Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting for us, and maybe it would be a Netflix special or something. But I just don't think that's probably a really good use of resources. But getting back to the tie, the thing that's been bothering me this week, because my mind is always thinking of things that are bothering me about the case, is that, for probably a lot of people out there already know this, but there were 3 seats in the row on the plane. He kept the briefcase with the alleged bomb by the window. And he had some sort of a bag with him that we call the mystery bag. Nobody knows what was in it, but it was shoved under the seat. And really only 2 people actually reported seeing it, and their descriptions of it are sort of wildly different. But regardless, he did have some sort of a thing that he had shoved under the seat. The tie was found in the middle seat. So when Tina was, all up front, so there were no witnesses to this. But before he exited the plane, he had to have taken the briefcase and the mystery bag, because they're gone. So obviously he either threw them out or he took them with him. I don't see how he missed the tie, because he'd have to literally step over or lean over the tie to grab the briefcase and then stick his hand.
It would have been right there.
And you know how hard it is to stick your hand under the seat of a plane, especially when you're wearing a parachute with paracord and a money bag attached. I mean, this is
he's fully loaded down. He doesn't have much mobility to do that.
I mean, it's a little bulky, so he's kind of wedging in the seat, and he just doesn't see that tie. I don't get it. I don't see how he missed it. I mean, to me, I don't think he cared about that tie. I think this was something that didn't mean anything to him, and he just took it off, because jumping out of a plane with a tie flapping in her face is probably not a good idea. And he took it off and he just tossed it. So I really don't think, because he was so scrupulous about asking for the ransom note back. He asked for the matchbooks back that he had the stewardess lighting his cigarettes. I mean, the tie could have really led them to him. Not only was there a tie, but there was the tie clip. And like I was saying earlier, there were some numbers on the back of the tie. Now, I've worked in retailing, so a lot of times that will be a factory code or some sort of, now it turned out it wasn't. It turned out it was just a price code. So it didn't mean it, but he wouldn't have known that. So for all he knew, that could have led to literally the town where he bought the tie. I mean, it just didn't seem like a smart move on his part to leave it there.
It was a J.C. Penney Towncraft tie, and I think that was the mother of pearl that they called the tie clip that came with it, that set. So it looks like that was original to the tie.
Well, actually the tie clip is part of a set.
Mm-hmm.
That was not necessarily sold at J.C. Penney. It was a very inexpensive, kind of like a little jewelry box, and it had cufflinks, I think a tie pin, one of those tie bars. Remember those? Mm-hmm. and ironically, a money clip. And then the
I didn't
tie
know
clip.
that. I didn't know there was I knew it was a set, but I didn't think it was a whole all of
Yeah,
those.
it was, but it sold for like a couple of dollars. I mean, it was the kind of thing that you'd buy, if you remember, we used to call 5 and dime stores, or it's kind of like Woolworths
Yeah,
of those.
that's what
Like they were,
Walmart was a 5 and dime before it got big.
well, okay, but I mean, they were not national, but I'm just saying, as a kid, Kresge's was another one that they had, the lunch counter. And I remember buying a friend, like in 7th grade or something, like a little bracelet there. So they would sell just inexpensive kind of jewelry. So that's where those were made, I believe, in the US, somewhere in the South. Again, they were sold everywhere. So that was kind of a dead end as well. But what's interesting about the tie, that underneath the tie clip, there are 2 holes. There's one that looks like a burn hole, and then there's just kind of a pinhole. Now, the pinhole's kind of in the middle, which would lead me to believe that was for a tie pin. Do you remember those? I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know if you ever had a tie
Yeah,
pin.
it was a
I mean,
clip-on tie, but they would wear the accessories.
well, or a regular tie. I mean, it didn't have to be a clip. These were just little round, sort of decorative pieces of jewelry. A lot of times they were given maybe like as a service award, or, they were just, I remember my dad had one, and they were just decorative. And instead of using the clip, it would go through the tie, presumably go through the front and back of the tie to kind of hold it together. But that was underneath where the tie clip would be. So it does seem to indicate that whoever was wearing that tie at some point was wearing something other than that tie clip, that they were wearing some sort of a tie pin. So I don't know if that indicates that there was a different wearer. And
or he got them independently.
And when they tossed the tie, they kept their tie pin, and then the new owner of the tie added their own tie clip. I mean, I don't know. I know the citizen sleuths. Now, again, these were polyester. It's probably hard to find a polyester tie now, and they're typically silk, but that's a different type of fabric. But they said there was a big indentation in the tie that appeared that tie clip had been there for a long time. I don't know. I maintain if you took a clip like that and put it on anything for a couple of days, I think it would make
it did it like that.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be there for years. And if the gentleman, because who was wearing clip-on ties back then? It was not business executives. Okay.
Yeah.
It was not Don Draper was not wearing clip-on. I guarantee that. So these were typically those ties, even JCPenney said, were typically sold to busboys and waiters and people in the service industry. So this clip-on tie, and men who might get a tie caught in a piece of machinery, and this way you wouldn't strangle yourself. So if we're going to assume that Cooper worked in some sort of manufacturing based on
the metals,
all the stuff on his tie, you would think that the clip would be used to clip to his shirt, because that's what really a tie clip is for. It's to clip your tie to your shirt so it doesn't move around.
not just the back part of the tie, but to actually stay with your shirt, right? In the middle of your, a little above your belly, so it's not drifting off if you're leaning over.
Especially if you're leaning over machinery, right? I mean, you don't
want to pull you in.
I mean, that's the whole point of the clip-on tie, right? So what I don't understand is, if that's the case, why is there only one indentation? If you had to take that off every day when you were undressing, you'd be taking that clip-on tie, because you'd have to unhook it from your shirt.
Great point.
So I don't know. I mean, again, this doesn't tell us who DB Cooper is. It throws more water on some of these theories. I think, like, oh, gee, we thought this was going to be the answer to it, and it
Hmm.
isn't. But I just do not think that we can, without a doubt, say that that tie was owned and worn exclusively by whoever hijacked that plane. I don't think there's any logical way that we can say that. Is there a better than 50% chance? I mean, I agree with that, but there's no way it's 100. So we have all these particles, which are really interesting, and they certainly need to be looked into. But pinning a suspect to the tie, I think, is going to be virtually impossible.
Yeah.
The other thing I don't understand is because when the citizen sleuths vacuumed the tie with like an MVAC machine, which is what they use to extract DNA. So those filters they're still in existence. And two of them have been tested for DNA. One was maybe like 5 years ago or something, and one was literally last week. And both of them came back that the primary contributor of DNA was the person who vacuumed the tie. It was the tester. It wasn't anyone else.
It's happened twice now that it came back to him.
It's happened twice. So I don't understand if whoever that tie was, why their DNA isn't all over that tie. I mean, I bet your shirt right now is covered in your DNA.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Now,
Yeah,
that doesn't
you know
mean
it.
that someone in your household might have touched it, or you
Anyone you
sent it to
came in
the dry
contact
cleaner.
with. Yeah, the dry
But
cleaner,
but
convenience
I mean,
store.
it's your shirt. And again, nobody washes ties. I mean, I'm sure you wash
That's
your
true.
shirt. I even read that now with DNA testing, polyester, you can wash it and still get DNA off of it. That's how good
That's
this is.
amazing.
Yeah. I mean, that's crazy. So that is really, really strange to me.
Yeah, those are good thoughts about the tie. I mean, it's just stuff you consider. I mean, I can see why people dig into it so much because that's really all we have. The
It
cigarettes were
is.
destroyed. It's the only thing he left behind. There's possibly a palm print or something from Cooper, but no one. I never hear that being tested against any top tier suspects like McCoy,
No,
Rackstraw, etc. So I don't know how good is it. It
I don't
can't
know
be
either.
that
And
good.
the fact that he didn't leave hardly any fingerprints. He went to use the restroom. I mean, presumably he put on a seatbelt. He had a drink. So I don't know what planes looked like back then, but I guess they had some sort of a tray table that the cup that he drank out of. I mean, how
Yeah,
do you drink out of a cup with liquid that's cold, a plastic cup, and not leave? I mean, just try the
that's
experiment
amazing.
at home.
Yeah, he must have been conscious of it. I mean, clearly that's a strike against Richard Floyd McCoy, who did leave a very easily distinguished fingerprint on his hijacking.
Well, I
So,
think now somebody said to me something interesting. Again, I like to watch all movies. So in the gangster movies, the bad guys, they used to put acid on their fingerprints, on their fingertips, because that was the way of evidence of choice back then, right? Was fingerprints. We've all seen them dusting for prints in the old movies, right? So they would put acid so it would kind of burn them off. So, but somebody was telling me that they had someone doing some painting at their house and they were using like sander, and they were having a hard time opening their phone with the fingerprint because after sanding someone, it just kind of like wears down your fingerprints. Also, he could have had glue on them. I mean, that was
yeah,
another
the Zodiac killer
standard.
claimed he used glue to hide his. He would use airplane glue, airplane cement to
Yeah, I
hide
mean,
his
that was
fingerprint,
another.
and that was done before. It was a case in Houston where someone had done that years and years ago
That was
to
kind of
hide
an
him.
And again, the TV show, The FBI, that was a super popular show. And we watched that like every Sunday night.
I don't remember that. I think you mentioned that on the Vortex, and I've never heard of that show. What years was it?
Ephraim Simless Jr. I've not seen reruns of it, so I don't know if it's even available.
Is it on YouTube?
That's a good question. But
I'm gonna look it up.
I learned a lot about forensics of the time. Like, for instance, I thought you could get blood type from saliva, which I think you can. So that's why I was kind of wondering why.
I always thought that too.
Yeah. So that was an FBI thing. But just getting back to the thrift shop thing, because somebody asked me this earlier on my own personal Facebook page. I have worked hurricane relief. I've worked church rummage sales. I've done all sorts of crazy things with people donating clothes. And let me tell you, that clip-on tie, somebody would have donated that. Okay. I mean, we had the grossest sweat-stained T-shirts and just nasty stuff people would donate. So, when you don't have anything and you've lost everything, I guess, you take whatever you can get. But again, going back to 1971, people didn't throw stuff away. So I can totally see someone picking up that tie and saying, well, this thing is still good. Somebody might be able to wear it. And I remember my mother, like, we'd get phone calls and they'd say, we're going to have a truck in your neighborhood next week and put a bag outside for like the wounded veterans, or there was, with these very legitimate organizations, and they just come by our house and they pick up the used clothes. Again, we didn't throw away good stuff. It had probably been recycled through a few family members. And
today
then
it feels weird to throw away old clothes. If it's old shirt you'll never wear, you just have to. I even have that sense myself. If I want to clean out, I'm like, I still feel bad about it. Like, somebody could use this somewhere.
Exactly. I know. And again, in 1971, these were Depression era people, and they were not just throwing away stuff. I mean, they lived through World War II when they had, rationing gasoline and meat and everything else. Things were, they had value. So I completely have no problem believing that this tie could have been recycled in some way.
I agree. I mean, it's just plausible as anything. I mean, may have been his tie. It looked like it belonged to a smoker. We know Cooper smoked on the plane quite a bit. Some even calling him a chain smoker by how many he did. But there's a lot of smokers back then, just the same as we talk about, was he in the military? Like maybe more than half the men at that time in middle age, 1971, were in some form of the military at that point. So it's kind of hard it could go either way.
No, I mean, I agree. The whole idea that maybe he smoked as a ruse to throw them off, I don't know. I don't
that's
really
a stretch.
like that idea, but I do think that because he did leave the cigarette butts, and Tina very clearly saw that they were Raleigh cigarettes. So maybe that wasn't his regular brand. I mean, I go back and forth between, am I giving Cooper too much credit or am I not giving him enough credit? That's where I am. He was
maybe he was so stealth. It looked like he wasn't, but he was. It's one of those things.
I don't know. Was he like this mastermind who was playing with everybody's head? I'm not really a smoker. I've got lifts in my shoes and I'm really 5'6", or, I mean, he could have been is he doing all this stuff? Could have been,
but I'm biased there.
Or is he like some loser guy who got lucky because nobody had ever done this before and the FBI was kind of caught shocked.
What?
Right? And
right. I mean, just flat-footed. Like, the bomb was a game changer. Yeah, the bomb is a game changer. I mean, no one had, there was, hijackings, like you said, to Cuba, but a briefcase bomb, that's different. No one had done that before.
And jumping out of the plane. I mean, that's like, okay, really? This guy's really going to jump out of a plane? So, yeah, they were caught Oh, somebody just put the
Yeah,
years of
my
the
sister, she said it ran from my sister said it ran from 65 to 74.
Okay. It was a popular show. And it would be fun to go back and look at how sort of corny maybe it was based on what we know now about modern forensics and everything. But for the time, it was, and the interesting part about that show, which I think a lot of people don't know, is that at the end of some of the episodes, they would show a real wanted poster of
A
someone who
real
really
case.
was wanted by the FBI, just as kind of like a public service. Because I think the FBI was very much in favor of the show because it really showed them in a very good light. I mean, they were, very diligent and honest, and they usually got their man, and, it just showed them very positively. So there was cooperation with the real FBI. And so they'd have, I believe they had a picture, somebody'd have to correct me on this, of James Earl Ray when
Oh,
he was
wow.
wanted for killing Martin Luther King Jr. I think he was actually one of the people that they showed his picture as being
That's
wanted. So,
I never heard of it. Staying with the FBI though, I definitely want to get your thoughts on, of course, the Tina Bar money find. And I know we kind of agree on that a little bit. And I know every time you would say what you believed in, like I know some people won't like this, but we don't have that problem here. I mean, speak your mind because if anything with DB Cooper with me, I like some conspiracy, and I don't see it in everything. But there's some conspiracy in this case. There just has to
I
be.
mean, I
There's
think
too
there
many
is.
weird things that happened and didn't
I
happen that
agree.
make me
If
go that
I
way. So
No, I agree. If I hear the word coincidence one more time, I think
right.
like I was scream. Not everything is a coincidence. And we're looking at pictures. Okay.
Yeah, that's
Tina Bar.
Tina, one of Tina back in the day, and of course the Tina Bar where Brian Ingram found the money. And if you watch enough Bruce Smith, you know that it was named after somebody that had developed the land way back when, and his actual name was Tenna, pronounced like Tena. So, but sometimes I think this beach sign says Tina, like Tina Mucklow. But I think back, and there's also one that used to spell it Tena, but it was still called Tina. But I think it was called Tenna way back when.
Okay.
But so, how do you think I know you've gone back and forth, and don't know 100%, but how do you
Well,
think
I
the
mean,
money wound up there?
obviously nobody knows how it got. Honestly, I don't think Cooper would know how it got there. I mean, I think if we were to interview him, he might not even know either. I don't like the idea that somebody put it there as some sort of homage to Tina. That to me
Yeah,
doesn't,
some people like that.
I mean, okay. Who even knew where this place was? I mean, that this was like a random, it wasn't remote, but it wasn't like, Asbury Park, New Jersey. I mean, it's
Yeah,
sort
it's
of
a
a
private
random little,
property.
yeah. And I mean, you had to like be a member or something. And,
Yeah, members only. I never knew if that was a joke or if it was
yeah,
true.
leave
I
like,
guess somebody would put like a nickel or something in that. I think that was like a little box by there. They would
yeah,
put a nickel in there for I guess the Fazio brothers who owned the land. Or whoever
yeah.
tended to it.
There was something like that. And supposedly kids used to have like keg parties and all kinds of stuff, but it wasn't like definitely like a super popular place. So I just don't think that the whole, oh, my favorite hangout was Tina Bar and Tina was the steward. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
That seems kind of wild. I think everybody's pretty much disproven all these, and I know nothing about river flows.
Yeah, I can't go near it. Yeah, I
I
never.
completely zone out. I'm going to let
Me
somebody
too.
else talk about that. The diatoms, I believe whoever came up with that because I don't know any different. I don't know anything about that. I do think, though, it could have been planted there. I know people, that's kind of
I
out
do
there,
too.
but
So don't be shy. I
well,
just
you know, there
it's too
were
good to be true.
I think some people don't realize that there were a couple of suspects that they were like really, really hot after. I know mostly everybody was disproven, but some of them or their cases are still open. Let's just say that. There's
Yeah.
like 4 or 5 guys that they've never closed the book on. And they have and they also tested their DNA too. So even with the DNA, they didn't close the book on it. So I don't know if you knew and were getting worried that they had already pulled you in, witnesses, had seen you on TV or seen the sketches or whatever. What better way to prove that you were at the bottom of the river than to leave some of the money right next to it? Now, I don't know how they could possibly know that somebody would go dig it up, but it sounds like it was almost barely under the surface.
Yeah, it wasn't that deep. And they were stacked on, there was 3, I don't know, they get into that a lot, the bundles or whatever, where there's 3 on top of each other. The rubber bands were still intact for the most part.
I've heard so many different things on that, but the gentleman who was the bank manager who actually transported the money from the bank, Seattle First, to the plane, he was saying that 5 $2,000 packs were rubber banded together. Like each packet would have a paper bank band. We've all seen
the
those.
little,
and then
they might have the denomination on it.
Exactly. And then they take like 5 of those and rubber band them. And of course, there were only 3 that were found. So if there were 5 together, I think that might be the money he offered the stewardesses, because he did offer them money.
That's an amazing thought to think of that's the money. Because Cooper was very generous and he offered money.
Well, if they're all rubber banded nicely together, you'd have to pull them out, right, from the packet to hand them the packets. You probably wouldn't take the time to try to shove them back in the rubber band. You might just throw them in the top of the bag. You might stick them in your pocket. So
yeah, they weren't with the rest of it.
I mean, that's a thought. Obviously I have no way of proving that. But nobody has any way of proving anything else right now.
No, they can't. No, even if they're a diehard. Oh, the money had to have washed up or maybe pulled up somewhere else and redeposited it back there on the Fazio land. I mean, I'm open to it all, but no one can prove anything with this 100%. It's a mystery within a mystery.
Oh,
how that money got there.
It's so annoying. Now somebody had come up with kind of an interesting one, because there was like an ice, like the river had frozen or something, and that it may have been trapped in like a little mini iceberg, which sounds kind of goofy. But it actually made sense. I mean, the person who did it knew what they were talking about. It wasn't me, because I don't know what I'm talking about. But that it actually could have floated, and then when it melted, I don't know how it really got under the sand, but I don't know. I mean, I don't think
it's got to be something like that.
I don't think he buried it the night of the hijacking. That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, and I think that Tom K's research kind of pointed away. The whole thing with the diatoms, it was, this algae fungus that grows on them, and that he said they were, I think, springtime. So, obviously he did this in the wintertime, and it couldn't have been. So it definitely pointed away for him planning it that night if it was Cooper on a getaway and he wanted to just come back to get it later. I think it really heavily pointed against that.
Yeah, I just don't think if you hijacked a plane and jumped out and got away with the money that you would bury it on a beach. That just seems like the worst place. I mean, I'd go find
horrible place to come get it. Yeah, look at just a road.
Well, and it's, I mean, is there there have been floods there. I mean, we know that. I would have put it if I had to hide it. Actually, where I would have gone? Because again, I keep going back to all these old movies. I would have gone to the bus station, the train station. They all had lockers.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned you saw it in a TV show.
And they also had where you could check your luggage and come back and get it. That's a really good place to hide, because
it's a great place.
And I think Cooper might have like completely changed his clothes. He could have worn, he could have put a fake beard on. He could have put a wig on. I mean, everybody
Or a
was
flight
looking
suit
for,
under the the disguise. He maybe wore a flight suit under there, something that was more
well, or
insulated.
just some different clothes. I mean, everybody's looking for like this middle-aged, dark-haired guy with a suit on, but you're not really looking for a guy with a mustache wearing like, a mechanic's uniform or something. So the fact that he did have that bag with him, which Tina said was kind of the size of a shirt bag, which I'm picturing is like a shirt, that when you buy
Like from a
shirts,
department store shirt box, like kind of flimsy but two piece.
that would fold in there. Now, when he went to use the restroom, he took the briefcase with him and he held it like a pizza box, which is strange because this was according to a witness. And the bag was laying on top of it. And she said that it was just a little bit smaller than the briefcase. So, that could easily fit a shirt, a light coat, maybe some sort of a hat. Because really, what was in that bag? I mean, I don't know. If he had a gun, that was not in the bag.
I know Ryan talks about that a lot, and some of the copycats, had weapons like that. I think a gun is high. I would think would highly likely if things got really out of hand or
But the gun would
got
be in his
desperate.
pocket. Okay, if I have a gun, it's not under the seat in the back. It's where I can pull it out, right? Because he was worried about there being air marshals on the plane.
Right.
So he's not, that gun is on his person. If we know he had a knife because he cut up the parachutes.
Yeah, he had like a pocket knife. I think it was described like a pocket knife he took out and immediately started cutting the shroud lines, MacGyvering it, as Ryan says, to strap the money around him.
Yes. And the fact that he knew, because I don't know anything about parachutes. So the fact that he knew to pull the ripcord, pop open the chute, and he went in there almost precision-like, cutting through the knots. I mean, the way that the parachute, it's like a spine with the knot, and was cutting through. I mean, this was something this guy had done before.
Yeah, he was familiar with the parachute enough to cut it up.
Yeah, I would have been like, okay, how do I open the, what do I do?
Yeah, how would it tie? Is it strong enough? What kind of, nylon material is this?
I mean, to me, to say that somebody learned this from a book.
Yeah, that's a stretch.
It's crazy. I think that's
to learn that from a book, to cut up the shroud line. Yeah, he's done that before. He was familiar with it, the way
even
he handled it.
I mean, he looked at the packing cards. Do you know what a packing card is? I mean, you do now, but
I'd never heard of it. Never jumped, but I'd never, until this case, never heard of it. What's a packing card? And those weren't easy to find. They're in a little bitty. They're small.
Exactly.
They're kind of hidden in there. Yeah, this wasn't a total rookie would have known to look for a packing card.
And when he put the back chute on, he got mad because there were no D-rings, which is how you attach the reserve chute.
The reserve. Mm-hmm.
Now, again, what are D-rings? Nothing that any novice has heard of. Now, maybe you got a book, but again, there was no internet. 1971. Did you go to your local library and find a book? I mean, really? I don't know. I don't think, I mean, I could see someone going and finding like the real basics of skydiving, like how to put it on, maybe how to pull the ripcord up. I could see that. I don't think that a book would get into the kind of minutia that Cooper seemed to know about. He knew the lingo. He knew, again, if they're teaching you how to skydive in a book, they're probably not even really talking about the packing cards because they wouldn't really be so important to you. That would be important maybe to the person who was teaching you or the the instructor at the skydiving school. There's a lot of talk about that Cooper picked the wrong chute, because per the packing cards, which for whatever reason, the packing card he pulled out of the chute he jumped with, he left that on the plane. We don't really know why. So we know that he jumped with a 24-foot canopy. He left the 26-foot canopy. Why do you think he did that?
Yeah, that's good. Good. They were both military chutes, despite people. That's one thing that Ryan and people like you have brought out, and the new researchers, that these were really both pilot bailout rigs. They weren't. It wasn't this military versus sport parachute, misnomer. But yeah, why would he? The 24-foot canopy to me means maybe a halo. But that's just me. I'm a little biased, but that's a good question.
Interesting, because I know we had talked about that. I've been talking to some of the gentlemen that were involved in Air America, which, for people who don't know what that is, Air America, and again, I'm kind of using that as an umbrella term, because there were, pictures of me. Okay. There were.
I knew we were definitely going to talk about. I love your Air America stuff, of course. I mean, that's one of the things that you've been diving into that I love.
There were several. These were all CIA run airlines. Okay, covert. They were in places we weren't supposed to be, or we weren't telling anyone where we were. There were several of them. There was Southern Air Transport, Civil Air Transport. But for simplicity purposes, Air America is kind of what everybody refers to them. And I've talked to a few of these gentlemen. In fact, one of them I interviewed on Ryan's Cooper Sleuth podcast.
Great show.
Captain Neil Hansen. And he actually, there was a movie in 1990 called Air America, and the Mel Gibson character was based on Captain Hansen. So that was kind of cool. Very interesting gentleman. If you get the chance, he has a great book. I'm not getting any commission or anything, but it's called Flight. Very interesting about his experiences. He actually flew the last plane out of Cambodia before it fell. It was some bad stuff. But one of the other gentlemen I spoke to, now Captain Hansen, of course, was a pilot, but one of the guys, and they call them kickers because they were load masters. They were the guys in charge of the cargo, and they were dropping stuff out of these planes into Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. I mean, they really started way before Vietnam, and they continued after. But our point of interest is really Vietnam, because that was kind of the Cooper era. And the kicker, who actually ended up becoming a pilot and was in Air America and was over there, he said that the guys he flew with who jumped, they preferred the 24-foot. And he was a former smoke jumper. A lot of the guys who were in Air America, they recruited because they were paying them a lot more money. And of course, working overseas, you get a nice big income tax break on top of making extra money. Plus they were subsidizing your housing and everything. So it's kind of like the expats today, the oil company people, they like to go have these assignments in, Africa or wherever, because they're sort of getting, extra pay or whatever for leaving their homes. So anyway, there were a lot of smoke jumpers, but he said that.
Right. Of course, smoke jumpers are the guys that jump out of planes to fight fires. They'll jump into the fire zone and fight fires. It's kind of that's where smoke jumper comes from. Just for the people that don't know.
Exactly. So a lot of these guys were recruited by Air America, which again was run by the CIA, to go over to Southeast Asia, and were working in Laos, Cambodia. Again, the U.S. government was telling us we were not in Laos and Cambodia, but we were.
Yeah, we weren't supposed to be there, but we were there, and they knew we were there, of course.
Yeah, that's common knowledge now. So these guys were working for Air America, which how this connects to the Cooper case is in 1967 and 68, they purchased 3 727s, one of which I believe crashed. But they still had a couple, and they were practicing guys jumping out of the 727s.
Out of the aft stair. Yeah,
Yes.
like Cooper did, of course. So that's obviously the belief that he picked it up over there and had knowledge of what they were doing in Thailand with the, they would put, what did they would make the staircase like hollow. They would use a chute or something, I think, or they would slide off.
They had a slide basically, and they were doing static line jumps. But they had 2 separate, and it was in Tak Lee, Thailand. I guess the plan was there was a problem, I don't know, with China and Tibet. I don't know if they were trying to take it over or what was going on. So the plan is that they were going to use these 727s to drop supplies and possibly personnel. It got scrubbed pretty quickly, but the point was they did test with guys jumping out of the back of 727s over there. And I've actually spoken with one of those gentlemen who did that. What's interesting is a few days after the hijacking, the FBI was interviewing those guys. So they knew all about this, and I cannot figure that one out. But
they were on it early because they found out that they were jumping to 727 as early as 67. So they thought, well, that's the first place to look.
Well, I mean, what's curious to me is this was an undercover operation, obviously, over in Thailand. It wasn't like on the front page of the New York Times. Yet somehow the FBI found out that this was going on like 4 or 5 days after the hijacking and showed up at the guys who had jumped like 3 or 4 years before and said, "Where were you Wednesday night?"
Yeah.
So I don't know.
They were on it fast. They were on those guys fast.
Yeah, they were. And again, I don't want to say it's a smoking gun, but what's very curious is the flight configurations that the 727s were using in these practice runs in Tak Lee were the exact flight configurations
that Cooper gave. Yeah, they call it flying dirty, or the dirty configuration, the flap settings, the speed, altitude.
I mean, he said trim the flaps to 15, which is exactly what they were doing over there. Depressurized cabin. Now, Boeing, it was a little unclear because they weren't very forthcoming, but they were practicing not personnel jumping out, but they had been practicing in Washington throwing cargo out, probably with the idea maybe they were going to sell these to the military, but they had a different flight configuration, which is really interesting.
That is.
They did not have their flaps, supposedly, according to people involved in the tests, were at 25. So how Cooper knew the exact
the Air America drops.
Now,
so either he's one of these guys, a pilot, kicker, or knew one and got the information direct to where he knew the exact configuration that he wanted.
It's definitely curious. I'm sort of leaning against him being a member of Air America or Southern Air Transport or one of those, just because it wasn't a huge group of people.
Tight-knit kind of.
I don't know, a few. Now there were mechanics and there were, other ancillary personnel, obviously, besides the people on the planes, but it just seems like somebody would have been figured out in all this.
Yeah,
What
the
I'm
way those guys
thinking
knew each
is,
other.
yeah, and they continue to have reunions. There's a really popular Facebook page of Air America veterans, because a lot of them were pretty young, so they're still around, and a lot of them have written books, very interesting books with lots of interesting pictures and adventures and all sorts of stuff. So it could be, but I think probably what happened is that somebody told someone what they were doing, which, old army buddy, there was a whole lot of drinking going on
Oh
with
yeah,
these
they
guys
they
in America. They were pretty wild, and I don't blame them for drinking, because what they were doing was like, oh my gosh, it was bad.
yeah. It,
Um,
it was it wasn't well. This wasn't well known. You could do this, but it wasn't an absolute secret. It got out.
It did. I mean, enough people would have come back to the States, would have gone on with their lives doing something completely different, and said to somebody, you see all these guys hijacking these planes? Well, when I was over in Laos, or I heard about guys, they were jumping at it. Oh, really? So, and
Yeah,
I could, now this doesn't help us solve the case. See, that's what I'm saying. Everything we come up with, it sounds brilliant until we go, but here's the way that it doesn't really narrow the field. But I do think there is some sort of, I think it's just too oddly coincidental.
it's the
Cooper
same
knew.
exact configuration that he gave was the AA setup, which, like you said, didn't have to be the exact. Like someone else knew it, but it would be a little different flying dirty than the exact specifications that the AA guys were doing.
Well, and the fact that Cooper didn't know how to open the stairs. A lot of
That's
people
that's
point,
huge. That's true. Cooper did not know how to open the stairs, and as we know, asked for Tina's assistance. It's hydraulic, right? There's a hydraulic uh,
well, I don't,
machine, or you have to crank it. There's like a crank or
yeah,
something,
I
or
don't think the
forgot.
stairs on that model, I think they were more by, standing on it. It was, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but
Yeah,
would make it go down.
yeah,
But the guys over in Talk Lee, they weren't opening the door because they had the slide. So
yeah.
they wouldn't have known how to open the door either.
It's just another thing that points to him either being one of those guys or having knowledge of exactly what they were doing, because otherwise he probably would have known how to lower the stairs and wouldn't need her assistance. And as we know, Cooper wanted that plane to take off with the stair down, and he knew it could be done, but the pilots didn't even know. And of course, he argued that, and he had to finally relent because the pilots thought, "No way, we're not going to take this jet up in the air with that door down. That would just do just horrible damage to the aircraft." And of course, Cooper knew that could be done.
Which is really strange, because if they got up in the air and they couldn't put the stairs down, well,
Jail
he was
cell.
in a bit. There he is. He's caught. He's done, right? So
Yeah.
that's really strange. He did seem to know. Well, the co-pilot certainly seemed to think that Cooper. I mean, he reported the night of the hijacking that he seemed to know a little bit about airplanes. I mean, just his use of some of the terminology like interphone,
Yeah,
talking about
interphone.
the stewardesses going to their station, things that we wouldn't
Yeah, that's like
use.
airline lingo, not just pilot, but like airline. I mean, maybe that'd be good for Kenny Christensen fans. That he knew some of that.
Well, and he did use the intercom at one point. And I actually talked to a pilot who had nothing to do with Air America. He was a commercial pilot and flown for years, I think with Delta. But he said one time he had to go back and use that for some reason. He said he had a hard time figuring it out. He said it wasn't like super obvious, like press here kind of thing. So he
Hmm.
thought that was really odd that, he knew where the oxygen was, because Tina asked him if he knew.
Yeah.
So he knew where that was. He ordered, now, supposedly he called them crew meals. That could have been the crew referring to them as crew meals, but he did ask for food, which is odd. He
Hmm.
did have supposedly had Benzedrine with him.
Right.
which is a stimulant,
Keep you awake.
which unfortunately it was definitely used in wartime, but it was used a lot by pilots to stay awake. So he was very familiar with that. He definitely had it down, I think. I kind of go with what Special Agent Larry Carr said, who worked on the case and really moved it forward into the public. Unfortunately for us, because now we're all hooked on it. But I think, he felt like the guy probably was a loadmaster, maybe not in Air America, but in Korea or wherever. His theory was the guy knew just enough to be dangerous. I don't think Cooper knew how to fly that plane. I don't think they could have put him in the cockpit and he could have flown it. But I think he knew enough about it. It's almost kind of sadly reminded me of the 9/11 hijackers. They knew enough.
That's a good analogy.
That they could kind of, I don't know that they could have landed it safely, or
but they trained how to fly it. They were going to those classes, I think, in Florida, Muhammad Atta, and they learned enough to fly it. But landing it's a whole different ball game than just flying it in autopilot and all that. They could learn that enough, but not how to actually land the aircraft.
Yeah, so I think
or take off.
I mean, he could have taken some flying lessons. He could have been a navigator or something in the war. Or one of the Air America guys who was not a pilot told me he typically would sit up with the pilot. And he said he knew what all the lingo and all the everything they were talking about.
Ride with them enough to pick it up.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like we might. I certainly wouldn't attempt to fly it, nor could I. But kind of like we're sitting here talking about it. I mean, we sort of know the lingo now, right? I mean, I'm certainly not going to fly a plane, but I know a whole lot more than I did before. So I think all that's curious. I think he definitely had some sort of parachute skydiving experience, whether it was wartime, which is probably most likely, or Air America. I don't think he was a guy who was just, sport skydiving just because of his age group. And they looked at all those guys. I mean, my understanding is they went up and down the West Coast and they talked to every single smoke jumper because they were kind of really on to that tack for a while. And then, every one of these skydiving clubs, they were even looking at Mexican skydiving club or whatever, because a couple of people said, he looks maybe Latin, or then there was Native
Latin
American,
or possibly Native American.
I mean, they looked at every single, the FBI, I mean, they left no stone unturned, but they still didn't catch him. So I don't know. Drew, help me. Why didn't they catch him?
Because maybe some people high up knew. I don't know. I'm a little biased. I think maybe the high ups knew, and they're not going to tell everybody. They can't trust them with that knowledge, so they got to let them spin their wheels and talk to everybody. But what do you think the calmness of Cooper points to? Because if you read enough about it, there's so many reports that this guy was calm. And like I read about one guy, and I might have posted it to our Facebook group. He said he doesn't show up to fail. He showed up to. He's not suicidal. He's not going to ask for the notes back if he wants to kill himself, or, he didn't show up to fail. He had a plan, and maybe he got lucky in a couple places. But what do you think the calmness would point to? It's just a mental illness, or just had done it before, maybe, or just didn't care.
I don't think he was mentally ill in the clinical or medical sense of the term. I mean, anybody could say, anyone who would do this had to be crazy, right? I mean, you could sort of say that, but not in any sort of real, having any kind of mental illness. I don't think that. I think he was a con man. I just think
that's
plain
interesting.
And simple, this guy was trying. I mean, the fact that he got the stewardess to sit there and smoke a cigarette with him. I mean, who's doing this? I mean, Tina, when interviewed after, said he was rather nice. He's rather nice. He's got a bomb,
gentleman.
or did he have a bomb? But I mean, he certainly could have had a bomb. Nobody was going to take that chance. I just think he was. I think he was just super confident. They didn't. He asked for a knapsack, the $200,000 in the knapsack. So instead, they bring him the money in, the traditional bank bag that
canvas
you see.
bank bag.
Yeah, very flimsy. So instead of demanding, "Where's my knapsack?" he improvises. He cuts open that chute. He ties it to himself. I just think this guy, because we always say, and again, I love the stewardesses, that Tina should really be applauded because she kept Cooper calm. You can also look at it like Cooper kept her calm. I mean, he never let
That's
any
a
of the
great
passengers.
point. That's an excellent statement there. She kept him calm and he kept her calm.
I mean, these ladies could have completely flipped. I mean, would we? We might have flipped out, right? I mean, they're kids.
Yeah,
young
our Flo was worried she was going to die. Remember in her Unsolved Mysteries, like she thought of her sisters and her brothers, had a big family, and never seeing her siblings again.
But oddly, when she left the plane, she came back because she said she forgot her purse. So I don't know about you.
That is a little odd.
With a mad
I'm long gone. You can have it.
I don't need it. I don't want it. Keep it.
Yeah, I'll get it later.
I mean, it's like she felt comfortable enough. Alice said to him, "I have plans for Thanksgiving. Can we get off the plane?" I mean, they felt comfortable with this guy. Why did they feel comfortable? He made
him at ease somehow. Put him at ease.
He was a charmer. I think he was kind of a charmer. I mean, just telling him "Ooh, you can come back here. I don't bite."
Yeah, I don't bite. Yeah.
This guy was right out of a Jimmy Cagney movie.
Yeah, central casting.
Some of his goofy, some of the terminology he used and stuff. It's like he was playing a part. He was.
Yeah, it's good to show on the road. Just really these benign sayings.
Yeah, I don't think these were his real. I don't think these were the clothes he wore to work every day. I think this was a big. I was even talking about this with someone today. I feel like this whole thing was just like a big con. It was just maybe everything was a con. Maybe nothing was what it seemed. I like to say it was magic tricks. It was everything he did was kind of for I don't know, everything sort of threw them in the wrong direction. And I don't think that was
a misdirection, like he was a master of misdirecting.
And that's the sleight of hand, like a magician, or the guys that 3-card Monty or whatever those guys would play on the side of the street in New York or whatever. I think this guy, I think he probably had a shady history, but not violent crime or some big time stuff. I think maybe
real violent, like some of these guys got. Some of the copycats were real violent.
I don't think so. I think it was more con man type stuff, ripping you off, embezzling money, just kind of bad checks, that kind of crime. I mean, this was certainly a big escalation because he could have gotten the death penalty. So this was, but I don't know that he really even looked at it that way.
I mean, no one knew the plane was being hijacked other than the stews. No one knew it was being, of course, the captain and everybody out, that got communicated to, but the passengers did not know that whole time, even though they were circling for 2.5 hours. They still didn't know what was going on.
Monkey down the aisle. I mean, I think everybody had to think something funky was going on, but
something was going on, but they didn't know. Even Bill didn't know that, even looking at Cooper and being jealous of him, he didn't realize he was the source of the delay.
I know. I know. It's like strange. So somehow this whole thing just, you know, I think he just would, like you say, he was kind of a master of misdirection. That's why I really think and I know you have a suspect that you love, and I think he's a very good suspect. But I do have the feeling if somehow we had divine intervention right now and we found out 100%, everybody agrees this is him, I still think it's going to be Joe Blow from Des Moines, Iowa. I just think it's going to be somebody. But I think because Darren always brings up a really interesting point, and I have thought a lot about this. What would you say if you saw two of the more popular suspects in the same photograph together? And it would not surprise me that Joe Blow from Des Moines was not in a picture with Ted Braden or Skip Hall or
McCoy or
even Robert Raxer. I mean, anybody. That would not surprise me because I don't know. I don't know that I'm not saying he necessarily had an accomplice, but I think he might have known about some things from someone else. I don't know. That just wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, and nothing would surprise me. Yeah, I have a suspect, but I would even say, and I'm not a big McCoy fan, but I would not be stunned or shocked even if it was McCoy or a name you've never heard. That's that's true. That's how a lot of these things turn out. Like Joe D'Angelo, you mentioned the Golden State Killer. No one would have ever seen that coming, but it all made sense once you knew the name. Oh, this guy was a former police officer, and he knew how to evade and all that kind of stuff, but it wouldn't me either. But that brings me back. I wanted to ask you about the sketches. How much stock do you put in any of the sketches? Do you think any of them are probably more accurate than the others, or why do you think people put so much stock in them? Of course, we have the first one they call the pink sketch because it's just plain looks like Bing Crosby, and then you have composite B where he looks, some more things were added in to make it, one thing was to look older. And I know Bill Mitchell liked that because he remembered, the turkey gobble under his neck, and it just remembered somebody being older. And then, of course, you have a Flo sketch from Unsolved Mysteries, which looks nothing like the other two. So you have three sketches here that really don't look a whole lot like the other, but everybody is the first thing they want to do is how much does this guy look like the sketch or not?
I don't think he did that. And to me, that sketch looks nothing like Bing Crosby. So I do have to say, kind of like the other ones, nothing like Cary Grant. And then Flo comes up with literally like Grandpa Munster. Okay.
Grandpa
Munster. Okay. Like Dracula or something. And I think because in her mind, she was so scared of this guy. And why shouldn't she be? You're just doing your job. It's Thanksgiving. It's the last leg of a long day. Some jerk she thinks is hitting on her. And then all of a sudden, what? What do you mean you have a bomb, right? I think her memory of him was that he was just this really super scary, horrible. He was like out of a nightmare. I don't think that's what he looked like, but I think I think she probably did have nightmares about him. And even,
I'm sure.
Even the witnesses were saying after a while, they weren't remembering if the pictures they were shown looked like Cooper or did they look like the sketch because they were so used to seeing the sketch. So I really don't think we know what Cooper looks like. Now, I think
it's not a photograph. I mean, people just want to hang their hat on it, and it's not a photo. And you have three that look nothing really like the other. I know they talk a lot of it's got to be number one. They were all in agreement with the Bing sketch, the first one, comp A, but it's just so generic. It could be a cartoon. I mean, it doesn't even look like a human.
No, and I cannot tell you how many times it's usually Ryan Burns who will message me and go, this is him. This has got to be him. Here's his picture. And they're all Cooper, except none of them are. I mean, it's like hilarious. Yeah. Like you almost could make any single person, other than I guess if they were African American or really super obvious.
Then you could roll it out.
100 years old, but I mean, every guy in their high school pictures, some were college pictures,
yearbook,
some were their army uniform. They literally, everybody, I swear everybody had a thick lower lip. There was
Yeah.
something going
They've
on.
been so much into this thick lower lip stuff. I'm like,
There
oh,
was
what? Oh, it can't be Ted. He doesn't have a thick lower lip. And then, it just
there
depends on the
was
photo,
something in the
too.
water back then. Actually, what I heard is the reason why a lot of people had it is because they would. I almost bought a pack of cigarettes today at CVS. I stopped myself
For
because I have
research
not bought a
purposes.
pack. I probably haven't bought a pack of cigarettes in way over 40 years. But anyway, just because they said, propping, how
Oh, that's a great point.
I mean, I've actually read that. This is not me, being so brilliant. Is
Never
that
heard of it.
think about guys who maybe are working on cars or their hands are busy and the cigarette's kind of propped and it kind of makes your lips sort of droop.
Yeah, and you might get in that kind of habit. Even when you're not
Yeah.
smoking, your bottom lip stuck out that's a good take.
Now, if I had been with the FBI, I have several things I want to ask Tina. Like, was that a new pack of cigarettes? Because the whole idea was he fake smoking. Well, if he was fake smoking, that would probably be a new pack, unless he had been pretending to fake smoking. But I'd like to know, was that a new pack of cigarettes? Because the matchbook was almost empty. So obviously he'd been using the matches.
Weren't there two matchbooks? There was the Sky Chefs and then whatever the other one was. I get rusty.
The International Correspondence School was the
Right.
first matchbook, but then that one was used up pretty quickly. So between the two of them, there were only 8 cigarettes, which means there were only a couple of matches left. So then they kind of stuck that somewhere. And then he pulls out Sky Chef matches, which of course, Sky Chef was the restaurant that's in all the airports.
Yeah, the food, yeah.
So if it was a new pack, you'd have to open it up and you know how they'd have plastic on or whatever. But his hand was always, you can spot a fake. Okay.
I like that.
His right hand was always in the
briefcase.
The briefcase. So he was having to smoke with his left hand, obviously. So he was having her light, because it's kind of hard to light. I know people have said they could light a match with one. Okay, I don't have that talent, but I want to know, how was he smoking? Was he smoking like this, or was he doing like the Humphrey Bogart?
Yeah, like a cigar.
So I don't know. We have no information on that. Tina said she really only saw him from the side, which we know that that's not true, but I think she was just really trying to avoid, because, if you're like in a robbery or something.
Like it would escalate it if she made eye contact. If she's sitting next to him, she doesn't want to rattle him.
No, I didn't see you. Go ahead. You can, I can't identify you. I mean, I think that was just a defense mechanism. Again, I think this is just normal human nature. But just, weird things about him, I think she didn't really notice. I mean, she said he wasn't wearing any jewelry. I'm stuck on the thing about the watch. I mean, every man back then wore a watch.
Mm-hmm.
And if he didn't wear it on his left hand, like I am, because I'm right-handed, if he wore it on his right hand, I think
could be left-handed.
But we don't know, because she didn't see that hand. So I don't know. Where was his watch? There were no clocks on the plane. I mean, planes don't have clocks.
That's I wonder if there's nothing I've never read in the 302s where he would ask her what time was it. Did he ask anybody what time it was? That's I never thought of that.
Well, I mean, he knew it was after 5 o'clock, because he had asked for everything by 5 and they missed the deadline. So either he asked her what time it was, or he somehow looked at a watch, or he had something in I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I can only tell by how much sunlight through the window, just kind of, did it, and
Well,
did he always plan to jump during the day, and then it took longer than he expected for them to fuel the plane and deliver the ransom?
I don't think so. I mean, he definitely was complaining about how long it took to fuel the plane. Again, who knows how long it takes to gas up a jet? I certainly don't. So he
Yeah,
seemed to
and
have,
he was bothered by how long it was taking. That's when he's the most agitated, I think, was when what's taking
yes.
so long, and Tina would reassure him, or oh, it's just, this is how long it takes. Or
Well, and they did have some major glitches with that for whatever reason. I mean, it really was taking longer than normal. The other thing, though, that's weird is that he didn't specify. All right, he said he wanted to go to Mexico. I've seen either
yeah,
Mexico or Mexico City, which obviously are two different, not necessarily the same place. But he didn't say, fly this way or, my understanding is some of the other copycats gave more of the direction. Did he just assume they were going to go on Victor 23 because that was really the only way that made sense to go to
yeah,
Mexico with the mountains? You weren't going to 10,000 feet. You were going to end up in the side of a mountain. But he didn't know that, or maybe he did, that they couldn't get there on a tank of gas, right? I mean, was that, I know he never intended to still be on the
yeah. He
plane.
knew it'd be long gone, so that's their problem. How far they could fly.
So maybe but then there was kind of some back and forth on, well, how about we stop in San Francisco? No, I don't like it, San Francisco. So there was a little uncertainty on his part. Again, was he playing with them? I don't know. I think he jumped exactly where he intended to jump. I don't think he intended to jump right in the Seattle area. I mean,
Yeah,
I,
like
I just
immediately after it got leveled out or airborne.
because there was that time gap between him sending Tina up front, and then there was, what was it, like 20 minutes or something before he actually jumped. So what was he waiting for? I think he was waiting to see the lights.
Yeah, I've heard that
So
argue back and forth of the lights at Lake Merwin or at the
well,
dam.
people say there really weren't. I know that was a big thing on that Leonard Nimoy show, that they had these huge lights. Because remember,
Yeah, In Search of, which I also think is
coincident.
interesting because that show came out, I think, in September of '79, and I think it's convenient that Brian Ingram finds that money just 3 months later after that show airs, and everybody's thinking about Cooper again. But
Well, it is
that's
kind
just
of
one of my
convenient.
things.
Exactly. But supposedly that whole thing about them having these big spotlights on Lake Merwin is not true. But there just happened to be a fisherman who had fallen out of a boat at the exact same time that was called in, the exact same time they think Cooper jumped. So
Wow.
obviously, it's almost like these really are like aliens or something. I mean, I think if you wrote this story as a fictional movie or a book, I know I would be going, oh, come on, this is too
Yeah, yeah. Too
far.
much suspension of belief too many times.
Yeah. I mean, too many weird coincidences, too many strange things happening that night. The guy who was walking down Lewis River Road all wet, the road
Yeah,
that nobody ever walked on in the history of Lewis River Road, that
yeah.
just happened to
You're
be there.
suddenly there.
I mean, it's just kind of like one weird coincidence after the other. I mean, there's a lady that was interviewed. I mean, well, she claimed she saw Cooper jump. She was in Vancouver. I mean, it's a very detailed story. A couple people who interviewed her who were pretty smart found her to be totally believable. I don't know.
Could be. Going back to Tina again, because you said if you could talk to her, one question you would ask her were the cigarettes new. But what other questions would you ask Tina? Because my belief is Tina's memory and whatever she may or may not be holding back is probably the best we're going to get. Because I don't think Flo's going to come forward anymore. I mean, she did interview by Jeffrey Gray, and that's all she's done. What else would you ask Tina to help narrow down a suspect, or trying to just hone in on what she can remember, if
You know,
anything?
I think there were probably more things that and I'm not implying in any way that she was holding back or had some, sinister motive or anything, but more just about his demeanor. Was there anything about his voice? I know she said he didn't have an accent, but like, how was he acting towards her? I just think, just he's such a he is the Bing sketch. He's just this guy that's so bland, and he's everyone and he's no one. And that she had to have picked up on some other cues, or when I talk to people, you get a completely different sense of them than when you're reading the written
True.
word, or
Yeah, that's what, like, a negative against like the younger suspects that may have looked older, like a McCoy or Rackstraw. Like, okay, even if they could have looked older for their age, you think in concept and talking to them, you could kind of, if you were talking to, a 23-year-old's talking to a 28-year-old or a 27-year-old, they're going to be, just that whole dynamic's going to be different than a middle-age
it
guy.
totally, this guy like would have been her father's age. But then he's sitting there. I felt like he was being kind of flirty. He's sitting there like, I think it's funny that nobody thought it was odd that the stewardess was sitting having a cigarette with one of the passengers. That was
Yeah,
kind
well,
of a
Bill
little
Mitchell wondered
odd.
what was going on.
Yeah. He thought, I guess he was like a bigwig with the airline or something, but, just a lot about his demeanor and, some of the little gaps on. I was saying yesterday, it's almost like it would be kind of cool to do like a complete reenactment of this, because I think we find that some things kind of don't make sense when you act like it. Really only hit me yesterday with that tie. Well, how in the world did he lean over that
Yeah,
seat and grab all that other stuff, but he doesn't
and not
notice?
could have easily taken it.
And again, the tie was black, the seats were dark color, but the tie did have a gold tie clip, which,
With the
and
pearl,
we
the
do,
little
we do know
circle.
now, supposedly, even though the lights were very dim on the plane, that his overhead light was on. That's the latest thing that's kind of been discovered. So to me, that would have been like a spotlight
On
right
the tie and
on
the tie clip and the which was gold with the little circle with the pearl inlay. That would have
so
shown up.
I think it would have been, let me grab all my stuff, let me get out
Yeah,
of here.
and like you said, he's a guy that was not making, he asked for the matchbook back, his notes back, so they don't have his handwriting because he got the notes back. Why would he do that if it had anything at all? Like you said, like he didn't know it couldn't be traced to him. So, like you said, that kind of points away that he just got that tie from somewhere else because he was not worried about being connected to it.
I don't know. And yet he had no problem leaving the cigarette butts, which could have been a good clue.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, they didn't turn out to be.
saliva,
Now,
blood type.
I think it's interesting now that they're saying that when they did the vacuuming of the tie, and now they've got these filters which they've had sealed up, that there was a dog hair that's now being tested that was on the tie.
I've never heard of a dog hair. I wonder.
Yeah, that's new. But well, I've been hearing about the dog hair for a while, but I think now it's become more like an item to be tested. But we actually have the 302 from the FBI saying that after they found the tie, the first thing they did in 1971 was look for any sort of stains on the tie and look for hairs. Well, they said there weren't any hairs. I would think a dog hair would be visible to the naked eye. So I don't understand that. I think there was a lot of post hijacking contamination of
Oh,
this
had
tie.
to be. It was everywhere. They sent it back to some of the stores. It was in I guess a shoebox for better, like a better word. No one was thinking about DNA back then and handling it, and
no gloves again, because they
gloves.
did
It had mystique about it.
And again, there were no stains or anything that was usable on the tie. Now, Eric, who runs the mystery group, he had come up, which I thought was like a brilliant idea, on the tie that there's a little piece, little spindle, I guess, that you adjust when to make it come out or in. And that if Cooper had adjusted the tie, nobody's messed with that. It's kind of like it's a little time capsule there. It could be a great fingerprint or certainly DNA. Because now with even a couple of skin cells, okay. Of course, the tie is with the FBI, which is a problem. So, he did sue for access and they turned him down. Now, whether or not the FBI thought this was such a great idea, they would do it themselves.
They don't seem to be motivated to do so.
We don't know what's going on behind the scenes. I certainly don't have any inside information, but to me, that would be kind of an easy thing. Certainly dusting for a fingerprint would be like super quick, like, here, guys, just, DNA is a whole other thing because then you've got to, do your, we were talking earlier about the Golden State Killer. And I don't know if you've read the book by the woman who was like the citizen sleuth.
Yeah.
She ended up dying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can't remember. That's Pat Oswalt's wife. I can't remember her name.
Exactly. And she was a journalist, but she was so deep into that she was going to figure this out. And granted, that was a gruesome case. That man was responsible for
horrible,
horrifying rapes, murders. But she didn't complete the book because she passed away before she did. But she had narrowed it down, like literally to like 90 men or something. And of course, none of them. And she had
a good point.
This was like a citizen sleuth team.
Yeah, she knew it well. She had. They started calling him Golden State Killer because of her in that book, because before it was a East Area rapist and other names before. She made that.
Had a group of people working on this.
Michelle McNamara, thanks, Aaron.
Okay.
Michelle McNamara, it's her name.
And it's really a fascinating book on her methodology and why she was so obsessed, because this was such a horrible thing, and kind of like, and the fact that the guy could still be alive, and he is.
Yeah, thank God he was.
So to me, it's almost sort of like a cautionary tale, because I do think there are some people that are like way too deep in this, and it is an obsession.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. It really is. That's why they call it getting sucked into the vortex. It really is. I think I likened it, and I even told you, to like compulsive gambling. Really, it can be that compulsive.
Oh, I think so. In fact, today we went to see like a film festival, the old movie Rear Window, if you remember the Hitchcock movie.
It's, great movie.
Grace Kelly and Jimmy Stewart. Okay. Well, there's one, Grace Kelly was such a gorgeous woman. And, he becomes obsessed that he thinks the guy across the way at the apartment has murdered someone, right? So he's, confined to a wheelchair because he broke his leg. Well, meanwhile, he has Grace Kelly sitting, kissing him. It was the 1950s, so it was all pure and everything. But in the middle of this, he looks at her and he's like, yeah, but the guy across the way, I saw him. And I thought, this is like Cooper-esque. It's like, my husband says that no matter what we're talking about, he said, you figure out a way to insert something in the conversation or compare something to it, even if it's so random. And I'm always thinking about it. Like when I was watching the movie, I'm thinking about, gee, that reminds me of me, kind of. I'm supposed to be doing something else, but my mind is thinking about, how did he miss that tie? Or was that a new
Yeah,
pack
you
of
get like an
cigarettes?
it's in like an addiction, and you got a great life. You travel a lot. I know you got back from Greece recently, so it's not like you have no life and you're held up somewhere with 1,000 cats. I mean, you have a great life. You go see all these great live
I
music and stuff
know.
that you do, and you're thinking about this case. It's funny.
Well, it's not healthy. And I think it's become to the point of that some, and again, I don't have a suspect. So
Yeah,
I don't know.
it's free not to. It really is.
I,
You can still
I
just
don't have,
remain
so I
Cooper at large.
Yeah, I don't have to prove anything. I don't have to knock you down so I look better. I mean, I don't need to do that, but some people are doing that. It's kind of
Hmm.
it is a competition. And I love when
Yeah.
people say, "Oh, I'm not doing this for the money or anything." But
Yeah,
that's
there's no
because
money in it. Trust me, people. There's no money in DB Cooper books. It really isn't.
well,
It's not a whole lot of money. How Amazon works, and I've sold quite a few books in different. And there's nobody's getting rich off of writing about DB Cooper. Just word to the wise. Even
well,
Skyjack sold pretty well, but believe me, he didn't retire off of that book.
yeah, except they haven't solved the case yet. And I do think if somebody, again, definitively, this is the guy, and we found the $20 bills and
Yeah,
everything,
the parachute.
everything adds up. I don't know. I think there's a series. I think there's something in this. And maybe we're naive and we feel like other people care about this besides us. And as somebody said to me, I couldn't stop laughing. There's really only 200 of us in the world that really even care about this case.
That's so true.
I
That is
mean,
so true.
you
I think
know,
some people care. Like if it was solved, that people, oh, that's kind of interesting. Say with Zodiac, a little bit bigger, but and then a news comes out, that's big, and people kind of jump on for a while and kind of figure it out. But with Cooper, there's been so many misleading headlines and some of these British tabloids and stuff. Case solved, and all this, and it's the boy that cried wolf.
it's totally the boy. I mean, I literally had my name in a tabloid newspaper. I mean, this is like this is the highlight of my life. I cannot. I read this article and my name is in it. I'm like, is this a joke? I mean, I
And you didn't
just.
expect to see it, did you?
Oh, I mean, they didn't interview me or anything. They just mentioned me with the pet because I have looked a lot into the parachutes, as you know. We did try to get access to for people who don't know. I mean, Cooper obviously jumped with one of them on his back. The other back parachute is in the Washington State History Museum, where it was donated by the gentleman who, I mean, the FBI tested that chute and then they gave it back to the man that borrowed it from. So he had it for years and then somehow it ended up in the possession of the Washington State History Museum. And they're very nice, but they, I think, are totally sick of that parachute. It's not on display. It's in their research lab.
I didn't know that. I just assumed it was still on display. I've never seen it,
No, and
obviously. I know you
it
have.
has not been for a long time. Now, last I spoke with them, they said in October, I think it was going to be going back on display, but I haven't gotten any updates on that. And we were talking about being able to come in. Well, what we wanted to do was send it off to a lab and have it completely MVAC'd and all that. Well, that, as we used to say in New Jersey, forget about it. That was not happening. Okay.
Yeah,
So
which is
then
kind
we
of
kind of,
suspicious.
yeah, I mean, they were not doing that. And I understand why. So then we pivoted to, well, can we at least do, we know Cooper pulled the packing card out because we know from Tina that he read the packing cards, shoved it back in. Well, as you
Was
said,
that
that's a
that was
really,
from Tina, right? Was that from the Tucson book or whatever with the packing card? Because that's something that hasn't always been out there.
well, that's a good question. I'm not
I
sure
thought
if
it
that
came
was,
from the Tucson book, but somebody asked earlier. That's what made me think about it.
yeah, I
Like,
mean,
where did the packing card information come from?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure if it is
I
in
thought it was
a
a
Williams.
two-saw book, but if Ryan's around,
Yeah,
it can help. Oh, and
I
happy
think
birthday, by the way. Or Ryan's birthday was Friday, so happy belated.
I think it is in the book that he, you know, and he'd have to really stick his fingers. So anyway, so then we pivoted to, can we at least sticky stuff maybe that area? And they were kind of like, well, let's talk about it. What do you want to do? And we were actually going to bring in Tom Kay, who, the FBI trusted with the tie and the parachute. So he's a known commodity to the museum because they've worked with him before. So it all seemed like it might happen, but then it didn't happen because then they decided they did not want to do that for whatever reason.
Yeah,
So
I know
that
that
was,
got Bruce Smith's attention because Bruce was, how Bruce, mayor of Cooperville, always been around. That's one of the things that kind of brought him back into the case a little bit. Is when the museum denied access. He's like his conspiratorial antenna went off when the museum said no.
and unfortunately, there was an article, the one that I was mentioned in after that, that said that the reason why they did not let us have access to it is because the FBI was getting the shoe and was going to test it. That
Oh,
that apparently, at least according to the museum, was in their press release that they were not very happy about that article, that they said that was not true. So
wow. So that was just so that really was just a rumor,
I don't know. I mean,
or maybe it wasn't.
I was not involved in the article. And again, they didn't give us an explanation really, other than we're just not going to do it. So, anyway, now, of course, the dummy reserve, there were two reserves, two backs. The dummy reserve is missing. So, we don't know what Cooper did with that either. That was yet another thing he had to maybe throw out the door, or he used it for
Right.
something we don't know. And then there's the other reserve, the one that he cut up nice. And
Yeah, cannibalize the shroud lines.
he touched that a lot. And those shroud lines are like grooved nylon, which would be such a great place to get skin
Touch
cells stuck in
DNA.
there. Perfect place. Unfortunately, that is also in a box with the FBI. I actually enlisted my congressman's office. I
Wow.
decided, as a taxpayer, I thought I'd send him a little email, and they were really very nice. I said, "Where is this parachute?" The one, because it had been on display. There's an FBI museum at FBI headquarters in DC. It had been on display there, but that was years ago. And then a few years ago, it was on display at the Ronald Reagan Library. They had I wish I had gone, they had a really cool FBI exhibit, like Bonnie and Clyde's car that they were shot in, and like,
Really cool
the
stuff.
Unabomber manifesto, all this really cool stuff. And they had that chute there. So it was unclear, where did it go after that? Because the congressman's office kind of only got so far, and they're like, we really don't know where it is. But I think it's kind of been decided since then that it's probably in the Seattle office, which is probably where the rest of the evidence is. I think it's been moved over there.
Maybe the hair slide as well. This reported hair slide from the hair that came off of the headrest that's talked about.
That is, if you're talking about the premier evidence in the case, it's the hair slide. Because I spoke with a genealogist, FGG, for forensic genetic genealogist, who said the technology is there now that you literally can get DNA from the inside of your hair. Like, that's where we are now. So wow. Even if the outside of it has, because people were saying, well, they would
or been touched,
kind of glue, almost like it's glued sort of inside of a slide with some sort of, that didn't even matter. It wouldn't compromise in any way, because they literally can go inside the hair. So she said,
they could cut it and get to the.
Yeah. You get the hair. We know
We'll find the guy.
We will find it. The problem
Isn't that odd that you can't find the slide? Now that we, just give them the cigarette butts, which still makes no sense to me. But
no,
if the hair we know existed, no one can find it.
The hair is missing, supposedly for whatever reason. The cigarettes being destroyed almost right after the crime would have ensured that Cooper probably would never have been convicted.
Right.
Because, right? I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I watched enough shows. I would have gone into court and said, they threw away the evidence that it would have exonerated my client because somebody else's saliva is on there, right?
Yeah, we know this guy smoked Raleigh filter tip cigarettes. We know Cooper did, and they're like, we know that this suspect was said to smoke them, and you're like, where's the cigarettes? We don't have them, Your Honor.
I know. So that does not make any sense. And we do know that they were destroyed because it is in a FBI document that says they were destroyed. So either they're making that up, which why would they? They never anticipated that we would be looking at all those documents, right? I mean, those only
they could have never, ever dreamed that it would go that far.
No,
the documents would be available to the public and dribbled out, and that Ryan put them in searchable form, all the 302s, which are a lot. I mean, this is a lot of page after page after page.
Yeah. So, I mean, the FBI would have had no way of ever dreaming that all these years later, somebody would decide to sue the FBI and would win, and they'd have to release all the documents. So again, there's no cover up. There's no, funny business going on. And I do have to say, I have the utmost respect for law enforcement. Obviously, the FBI is the premier agency in the U.S., probably the world. They know what they're doing. I mean, this is not the Keystone Cops. This is not, the Three Stooges or something. This is the FBI, and they do know what they're doing. And they put every effort into this. And the fact that they still have no idea who this guy is, it's
baffling.
It is. And that's why we're obsessed, I think.
Yeah, that's true. It's like, who is he? And that brings me another question. This comes up with Darren a lot. Would you rather know who Cooper was? They're just going to give you the name, whoever it is. They're going to give you the name, or they'll give you every detail how he did it, but you don't get to know the name, like how where he planned it and where how he drove out of Portland, how they got out of the woods, all those details. Which would you rather have? Know all the details but not the name, or just know the name?
That is so easy for me. I just want to know who he is. I really don't care.
Me too. I think Darren always said he wanted the details. I'm like, no.
Somebody picked him up, or all right. I just give me a name. I want to look him up on Ancestry. I want to know who his mother was, because it's always your mother's fault, right?
That sounds like my mom.
I know. Well, I'm a mom, so I can say that.
Yeah.
But I want to know who he is. I want to know what he looks like. Because if we knew who he was, we could kind of
fill in the blanks. Yeah, where he lived. Yeah, you could fill in.
Yeah. Did he have a criminal history? What was his military background? Was he a pilot? Was he a truck driver? Was he a guy who was an expert skydiver? Or did he get a book out of the library? I don't know.
Right.
But are we ever going to be there at that point? I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I was going to end it with that. I was going to ask you what you think, because you always seem optimistic. I mean, you'll say we haven't come up that very far since 1971, but you also seem optimistic that we will get somewhere. So do you think what do you think the chances are that this case gets solved to everyone's satisfaction?
Well, my optimism is based on the only way we ever will know, unless we find a body at the bottom of a well with a parachute on and, $198,000 or whatever, $94,000 strapped to his body. The only way we will ever know is the DNA. So I do still hold out hope that somehow someone will get to someone who will decide that it's time to test. Now, again, the DNA may be too degraded on the FBI shoot. I mean, it's in a box. So that hasn't been handled, probably hardly at all, because it's a big pair, it's all rolled up. I mean, they're not going to be passing that around like the tie. The tie that was it for a long time. And the tie was a holdback. Remember, they didn't tell the public about the tie for a while, which that was probably a mistake. They probably should have immediately said he's wearing this tie. But I think if we could get the DNA, it can be solved. It's just a matter of, is the FBI going to, whether it's from the spindle, whether it's from the packing card, whether it's from the sheet that the FBI has. If we can't get that, I just don't see, again, other than a body showing up, which is pretty unlikely
after, this many years.
After all this time. If I didn't think it would be solved, I just don't think I would be sitting here. I almost think that's like such a depressing, pointless thing that we've wasted all this time.
That's a good way of saying it.
I mean, what are we doing here? But
what have we done all these hours?
What are we doing here anyway on a Sunday night?
Yeah.
So I'm hopeful, but I just don't see this moving forward right now. So we gotta kick some stuff up and get it moving.
Oh, that's good. I love your optimism, and I learned a lot tonight. I wanted to bring this up. I want to bring up your friend Kiki Friedman that passed away recently. I was a fan of Kinky, so that guy was a Texas original. I knew you knew Kinky well, and you were friends with one of his, I think, band members you're friends with. And Kinky's band.
I mean, I only pretend like I really knew Kinky. I mean, I met him a lot because I went to a lot of his shows and everything, but he certainly wouldn't have known who I was. But yes, he was definitely, if you're from Texas, he ran for governor. He's a
great guy,
a real character, and he did pass away last week. So
yeah, great guy. Great picture you got with him. This was great, Pat. I learned a lot that I didn't know because you know so much about the case.
Oh, well, thank you.
You're at the forefront of everything, and I love that. Any new finds you have, just fascinated by, like the tie you just came up with, and then the Air America stuff is great. I love it that you're out there, just turning over rocks, and that you have that motivation to just keep going, which is awesome, because that's what will keep this case going, to hopefully a resolution somewhere.
Hopefully. Well, if nothing else, it's keeping us out of trouble, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. Keeps us hopefully out of the bars and the casinos. Or
well, I don't know about that. Because remember, I'm retired, so we're pretty wild in our old age. But anyway, well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. It was a lot of fun. We'll do it again soon.
Virtually meet you. I know we've met over Messenger, but not. I think we've talked on the phone.
Yeah, we did. We did a while back.
Ago, so anyway, good. We'll stay in touch, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, and thank you to everybody that was in the chat. And if you have any questions for Pat, you can drop them in after the video uploads to YouTube. You can put the questions there, even though there was a lot of great comments in the chat tonight. But thank you, everybody, tuning in.
Well,
and please hit the like button if you can.
Yeah, I mean, if there's any questions that I can answer, or
drop them in the chat.
Find me somewhere, I guess.
Yeah, you can find Pat. She is around. She's on Facebook, and I know where she is.
Okay. Well, they can contact you, and you can get to me.
Perfect. All right. Appreciate it.
Right.
Thanks, Pat.
You. Take care.
Have a good night, and everybody have a good week.
All right.
Stay safe, everybody.